Well, starting off this hour, for years, negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership have played out behind closed doors. And yet, the nations involved in this brag that it could be the biggest trade agreement of our day that would address everything from food to medicine to intellectual property. The 12 nations involved in the TPP talks could be getting close to a deal. However, critics warn this agreement could actually hurt the public by acting on behalf of major corporations instead of for the public good. Last week, thanks to the latest document drop by the secret-spilling organization WikiLeaks, people from around the world got a first glimpse of part of those negotiations dealing with intellectual property. The fact that this information came from WikiLeaks instead of the Obama administration, which touts transparency, has infuriated some.
Well, it's remarkable. We have to depend on WikiLeaks to find out what the hell's going on.
So what did we learn from the 95 leaked pages? And how did WikiLeaks get its hands on the draft of the TPP talks to begin with? Earlier, I was joined by Christian Hrafnensen, WikiLeaks spokesperson, and I asked him why WikiLeaks is so interested in the TPP.
Well, what we, of course, are all about is revealing secret documents that are being kept from the general public, which are affected by these documents, and that certainly applies to this draft to the TPP, as is evident from the content of this very important chapter of the draft concerning intellectual property rights.
Now, should we expect more leaks like this about the TPP negotiations in the future?
Well, we are always careful about talking about what is in store, and I think I'll stick to that policy. But we have been publishing information which are of great importance to the general public, well, we have to see what we have in store.
Now, how did your organization acquire these documents, if I can ask?
Well, of course, that's another question. I could never give you an answer that you would like. We're dedicated in protecting our sources, and we go to great lengths in protecting them. And we never discuss our sources, basically.
Understood. So what is the most startling thing to you about this leaked TPP document?
Well, there are very many things that are of grave concern that spring out of this document. Of course, the most important thing, of course, is that the fact that this has been drafted in secrecy without the general public, the 800 million people who are going to be affected by this treaty have had a chance to review it. And even in the U.S., of course, there's been an attempt to fast-track this treaty through Congress without elected members of the public being able to scrutinize every angle of it and make any amendments to it. But there are many elements within the treaty itself. We can talk about the simple fact that the pharmaceutical industry will make it much harder for the poorer people within this area to get access to affordable medicine. We can talk about the effect on the internet, which is going to be stifling. There are so many angles there, and it's all serving, of course, the big corporate interest. And it is not surprising, of course, when you consider that hundreds of representatives from those interests had priority access to the negotiating table, access that was denied to the general public.
So do you think the biggest problem about these negotiations is that they aren't transparent or that they cover too much? What should people be most concerned about here?
They should be concerned about, of course, the process, that is the secrecy surrounding this very important treaty, covering a large part of world trade, a third of world trade. These are countries that combined have about 40% of the GDP of the entire world. And it is setting a benchmark even for further negotiations in this field. It has been proclaimed by the Obama administration that this is the blueprint which is going to be used in the recently started negotiation on a transatlantic treaty, between the US and the European Union. So this is basically setting the standard on world trade in total secrecy. Another element which should be extremely worrying to the general public is the fact that the enforcement mechanisms that are set out in this proposal, setting out supranational tribunals, will supersede high courts and supreme courts in the countries, where corporate lawyers will be sitting and judging on matters concerning individuals within each of the countries concerned, bypassing the judiciary. So it is a very, very grave matters that are coming front to our attention with this leak, and we should be concerned about the simple fact that many elements of this treaty, especially in this chapter, in this intellectual property rights chapter, have been protested and suppressed on the national level. For example, the SOPA idea in the US, which is then springing forth in a supranational treaty as a Trojan horse in a so-called trade agreement. And I say so-called because only 5 of the almost 30 chapters in the TPP actually are concerned about trade. The rest is protective measures, which are all about the interests of large multinational corporations.
Very concerning indeed. Now, there are reports that the leak of this chapter could have delayed the passage of the TPP from making the U.S. Trade Representative's deadline. Was that your intention with this leak, is to slow down those TPP talks?
Our intention was basically to pass this document, which was on to the general public, a document that was passed on to us. This is what we are about. We are a publishing organization. We are fighting unnatural secrecy on matters which concern the general public. And I believe it's only natural that when this comes to light, when people start to digest what this entails, when organizations that have been diving into the material and seeing how harmful it could be, like Doctors Without Borders, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, those who have had grave concerns about matter that this treaty touched upon. Of course, this is raising concern, and the concern is transferred over to elected representatives. And I'm sure, of course, people will take a second look and think carefully before they allow their administrations to sign this treaty, as was the plan to do this in total secrecy, which is absurd.
And we only have about 30 seconds left, but how involved was Julian Assange in this leak, or has he been sidelined as a result of being holed up in that Ecuadorian embassy in London?
No. Julian was in the midst of this, and of course he directed the entire work. I can say, without going into any details, that this leak took quite a bit of extra work in our work, of course, in protecting our sources. I spent some time in London in the Ecuadorian embassy and with Julian. Julian was directing this work and is, of course, directing the organization, even though the work is a bit more difficult given its circumstances.
And on a different note, looking back at the Edward Snowden leaks, what are your thoughts about that? Would your organization have preferred for him to come to you?
Edward Snowden took his own decision, but it's very important to keep in mind that what WikiLeaks started in 2010 was a trend. We started a new thing, try to open a window, a door, if you may, that others have followed, and certainly Edward Snowden is one of them. And of course, we have acknowledged that and supported him as much as we have been able to in his plight.
Christian Hrafnsson, WikiLeaks spokesperson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.